The last freighter to leave Earth's system before the wall went up was a battered ore hauler called the Meridian Grace, and Kessa Vale watched it die from a maintenance gantry 6 kilometers above the surface of the lunar yards. She was 23 years old, and she had never seen anything killed before. The Grace had been running late, the way slow ships always ran late, its holds packed with lunar titanium bound for the trade rings of Vesic Prime, and it had been climbing out of the gravity well on a lazy parabola when the sky above it simply stopped being sky. There was no explosion at first. There was only a shape unfolding across the black, vast and geometric and wrong, a lattice of pale light that spread from horizon to horizon the way frost spreads across a window pane, and where the lattice touched, the stars went out, not dimmed, out, as though a hand had reached across the heavens and pressed each one closed. The Grace tried to turn. Kessa saw its engines flare hard, saw the old hull shudder against a course it was never built to make, and then the lattice contracted, and a single thread of that pale light reached down and touched the freighter's stern, and the Grace came apart. It did not burn. It unmade, section by section, the metal peeling into ribbons of nothing, the running lights winking out one by one down the length of the spine, until there was only a scatter of frozen debris tumbling back toward the moon, and 41 people who had been alive a moment before were simply no longer part of the universe. Kessa did not scream. She had been trained not to scream. She was an atmospheric integrity technician, 3rd class, and her hands were still holding a torque wrench against a coupling she had been tightening, and she stood there in her suit on the gantry with the wrench in her hands and watched the last ship leave, and understood, in the way one understands a thing in the marrow before the mind has caught up, that no one was leaving anymore. The lattice finished closing 11 hours later. By the time it was done, it enclosed the entire Sol system in a shell 40 billion kilometers across, a sphere of interlocking energy that the surviving telescopes could see but could not penetrate, that swallowed light and radio and gravity wave alike, that let nothing out and nothing in. From the surface of the Earth it was invisible. The sky still looked like the sky, but every observatory that turned its instruments outward found the same thing. The stars had become a painting, fixed, sealed behind glass. The rest of the universe had been amputated from the human race with a precision that no human weapon could have matched, and humanity had been given no warning, no demand, no chance to negotiate. They learned the reason 12 days after the wall closed, when the voice came. It arrived on every frequency at once, in every language humanity had ever broadcast, and it did not sound angry. That was the part that Kessa would remember longest in the years afterward. It did not sound like a conqueror. It sounded like a physician explaining a diagnosis to a patient who would not survive it. "People of Sol," the voice said, "you are quarantined." Kessa heard it in the crew commons of the lunar yards, packed shoulder to shoulder with 300 other workers, all of them silent, all of them watching a wall screen that showed nothing but a slowly rotating symbol none of them recognized. A ring of light broken at a single point. "You are not being punished," the voice went on. "You are being contained. The Concord of 900 has studied your species for 2 of your centuries. We have observed your expansion, your consumption, your capacity for organized violence, and your rate of technological acceleration. We have concluded that within 4 of your generations, unchecked, you would constitute an extinction-level threat to civilizations that have kept the peace for longer than your world has had oceans. We take no pleasure in this, but the mathematics are not in dispute. You are a fire, and we have chosen to starve you of air rather than let you spread." A murmur went through the commons. Someone began to weep, quietly, the way people weep when they are too frightened to make noise. "The boundary you observe is a sealing lattice," the voice said. "It is self-sustaining and self-repairing. It cannot be broken by any force your species can generate. We have modeled your entire industrial output for the next 400 years, and it does not approach the threshold. We do not expect you to accept this. We expect you to strike the wall and fail and strike it again and fail until you understand. In time, your population will stabilize within its limits. Your expansion will end. Your danger will end. This is not death. Your sun will burn for 5 billion years, and you may live beneath it in peace, as you were always meant to, on the single world that birthed you. We wish you no harm. We simply cannot allow you to leave. The symbol rotated once more, and then the screen went dark, and the voice did not come again. For a long time no one in the commons moved. Then, near the back, an old yard foreman named Idris Akafer stood up on a bench, and in a voice that shook only a little, he said the thing that would end up printed on 100 million walls before the year was out. They forgot to ask us, he said, whether we agreed. Kessa Vale had not been born on Earth. She had been born in the long tin corridors of the Luna yards themselves, third-generation orbital, a child of the vacuum trades, and she had grown up understanding machines the way children on the homeworld grew up understanding weather. Her mother had been a hull stress analyst. Her father had welded seams on deep system tankers until a decompression took him when she was 9. She knew the smell of coolant and the particular silence of a pressurized room and the way a good weld sang under a percussion tester. She did not know the open sky. She had seen Earth only from orbit, a blue coin turning below her, close enough to touch and as unreachable in its own way as the stars now were to everyone. She was, her supervisors agreed, unremarkable. She was a competent technician with clever hands and a stubborn streak, and no particular ambition beyond a berth on a long-haul run someday, out past the rings, out into the deep. That was the thing she had wanted, the only thing, to go out, to be one of the ones who left. And now there was nowhere to leave to. In the weeks after the wall, the yards fell into a strange half-life. The freight lanes were dead. There was nothing to freight. The tanker crews sat in their bunks. The great construction slips that had built humanity's outbound fleet stood empty, their gantries folded because the fleet had nowhere to go and no one to fight. Earth's governments issued statements. The conquered did not respond to statements. Warships were dispatched against the Lattice. The proud dreadnoughts of the Terran combined command, and Kessa watched the feeds like everyone else as they poured everything they had into a single point of that pale shell. It was worse than watching the Meridian Grace die. The dreadnoughts fired for 6 hours. They fired kinetic slugs the size of office buildings and antimatter lances, and the coherent fury of every weapon the species had ever devised, and the Lattice did not so much as ripple. It absorbed. It absorbed the way the ocean absorbs a thrown stone, with a brief small disturbance and then nothing, the surface closing over as if the stone had never been. When the fleet ran dry, the Lattice pulsed once, gently, almost kindly, and the leading dreadnought, a 2-kilometer monster called the Indomitable, came apart into ribbons the way the Grace had, and the others turned and ran, and the message could not have been clearer if the conquered had written it in fire across the sky. You are children throwing rocks at the tide. After that, something in humanity's collective spine seemed to sag. The strikes stopped. The proud statements grew quieter and then stopped too. Ships were mothballed. Rationing began because a closed system is a finite one, and the accountants of the species began the grim arithmetic of a civilization learning to live inside a box. On Earth, the crops that had depended on off-world phosphate began to thin. In the belt, the mining colonies that had lived on ship-tin water began to die. The conquered had been right about one thing: humanity was going to stabilize. It was going to stabilize the way a fever stabilizes when the body starts to fail. Kessa Vale might have vanished into that slow suffocation like everyone else, might have become one more technician tightening one more coupling on a ship that would never fly, if not for a woman named Dr. Rennick Salanwar, and a folder marked with a single word that Kessa had at first entirely failed to understand. The word was Zeus. It began with a summons she assumed was a mistake. Kessa was pulled off the integrity line 4 months into the blockade, reassigned by an order that came down through 3 layers of authority with no explanation attached, and told to report to the deep slip, Slip 14, the oldest and largest of the Luna Yard's construction docks, a cavern of a place carved into the rock of a crater wall, sealed off now behind blast doors that had not opened in her lifetime. She had assumed she was being fired. Everyone was being fired. Instead, a Marine in unmarked armor checked her palm against a list, and the blast doors ground open, and Kessa Vale walked into the largest secret humanity had ever kept. Slip 14 was not empty. It held a ship, or the beginning of one, and it was unlike anything Kessa had ever seen. It was small. That was the first shock, because everything about the war effort had trained her to think in kilometers, in dreadnoughts, in mass, and the thing in the slip was barely 100 meters from nose to tail. It was slender. It was almost delicate, a long dark spindle wrapped in a lattice of its own, a scaffold of struts and rings and coils that reminded her uncomfortably of the very thing sealing the sky. Hundreds of people moved across it in a silent choreography, and above them all on a gantry stood a small woman with steel-gray hair and a datapad, watching everything, missing nothing. That was Dr. Rennick Salanwar. And when she saw Kessa standing frozen in the doorway, she did not smile, but she came down the gantry stairs with a quickness that belied her years, crossed the deck, and looked up into Kessa's face with eyes the color of cold iron. "Your Vale," she said, "the atmosphere tech, 3rd generation, born in the corridors." "Yes, ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. I do integrity work, I don't." "There's no mistake." Rennick turned and looked back at the dark spindle in the slip. "Do you know why I pulled you, out of 40,000 technicians in these yards?" "No, ma'am." "Because you've spent your whole life keeping air inside places that wanted to escape into vacuum. You understand pressure differentials in your sleep. You understand what happens at a boundary between 2 states that are not supposed to touch." She looked back at Kessa, and now there was something fierce and quiet burning behind the iron of her eyes. "And that, technician, is the only problem that matters anymore. Everything is a boundary problem now." She gestured at the ship. "That is Zeus," she said, "and you are going to help me put a hole in the sky." Kessa looked at the small dark ship, and then at the tiny fierce woman beside her, and she thought of the dreadnoughts breaking like glass against the lattice, and she thought that this woman was mad, and she said none of it, because something in the way Rennick had said the sky had made the hair stand up on her arms. With that was all she managed. Ma'am, it's tiny. The whole fleet couldn't scratch the wall. That thing wouldn't." "No," Rennick agreed. "It wouldn't. If we tried to break the wall, you're right, it's absurd. 100-meter ship against a shell 40 billion kilometers across." She began walking toward the slip, and Kessa followed because there was nothing else to do. "But we are not going to break the wall, Kessa Vale. Everyone has been trying to break the wall for 4 months, and everyone has failed because the wall is stronger than us, and it will always be stronger than us, and the Concord built it knowing exactly how strong we could ever be." She stopped at the base of the ship and laid one small hand against its dark hull, almost tenderly. "So we are going to do something they did not model. We are going to stop asking how to break it and start asking what it is." "I don't understand." "Neither did we for a long time." Rennick smiled then, finally, and it was not a comforting smile. It was the smile of someone who has found the single loose thread in a thing that was supposed to be seamless. "Come with me. I'm going to show you the loose thread. And then, technician, I'm going to tell you what Zeus is really for." The loose thread was hidden in the observatory that Rennick had built inside the crater wall, 3 levels below Slip 14, in a chamber so cold that Kessa's breath fogged the air. The room was full of light that was not light. Screens covered every surface, and on them, rendered in false color, was the sealing lattice, not the smooth painted-over sky that everyone saw from the surface, but the thing itself, magnified and slowed and analyzed until its true nature was visible. And its true nature, Kessa saw, was motion. The lattice was not a wall. It only looked like a wall because it moved too fast for the eye. It was a weave, a titanic loom of energy threads crossing and recrossing, each thread whipping across the boundary faster than light itself, and where they crossed, they formed the nodes that swallowed anything that touched them. "It's not solid," Kessa said slowly, understanding coming. It's woven. It's a lattice of moving lines." "Now you see why I wanted a pressure technician." Rennick's voice was soft in the cold. "The dreadnoughts failed because they treated it as a wall and hit it with force. But you don't fight a weave with force. You unfights it. You find the moment between the threads." She pulled up a single node and slowed it a millionfold, and Kessa saw what she meant. Where 4 threads crossed, there was a node. But between one crossing and the next, for a span of time so small it had no meaning to human senses, the threads separated, and for that infinitesimal instant there was a gap, a window, a place where, for a fraction of a second, the wall was not there. "That's the loose thread," Rennick said. "The Concord's lattice is perfect. Perfectly strong, perfectly self-repairing, perfectly beyond our power to break. But it is a woven thing, and every woven thing, no matter how fine, has spaces in the weave. The gaps open and close roughly 900 trillion times a second. Each one lasts about 100 attoseconds and is perhaps 40 meters across at the widest. And through that gap, for that instant, there is no wall at all. There is only open space, and the universe on the far side." Kessa stared at the slowed image, at the impossible fleeting window blinking open and shut in the weave. "You want to fly a ship through a hole that's open for 100 attoseconds," she said. "A hole that's 40 meters wide and moving faster than light and closing before. There's no material that fast. There's no engine that fast. There's no pilot alive who could." "No," Rennick agreed. "There isn't, not a pilot and not a ship, not the way ships are built." She turned from the screen and faced Kessa fully, and the fierce, quiet burning was back in her eyes. "That is why Zeus is not a ship, Kessa, not really. Zeus is a lightning bolt." She explained it over the following hours in that cold room, with the lattice blinking its impossible windows on the screens behind her. And by the end of it, Kessa understood 2 things. That the project was insane, and that it might, just might, be the only sane thing anyone in the whole doomed system had thought of. Zeus would not fly through the gap. Nothing could fly through the gap. The timing was beyond any reactive system. Instead, Zeus would predict it. The gaps in the weave were not random. They were the product of a fixed process, a mathematical rhythm as regular as a heartbeat. And Rennick's team had spent 4 months recording that rhythm and learning its music until they could forecast, to the attosecond, exactly where and when the next window would open. The problem was not speed. The problem was prediction, and prediction was a thing humans were very, very good at when they were desperate enough. And Zeus itself, the dark spindle in the slip, was not built to survive a journey. It was built to become one. At the heart of it was a device Rennick's people called the loom breaker, though privately Kessa came to think of it as the throat of the thing, because what it did was swallow. When Zeus reached the boundary, at the exact predicted instant a window opened, the loom breaker would fire, and it would not push against the wall. It would reach into the gap, into that 100 attosecond space between the threads, and it would hold the window open. Not by force, by resonance. By matching the exact frequency of the weave and singing a counternote into the gap, a note that would keep the threads apart for a few thousandths of a second instead of a few hundred attoseconds. A few thousandths of a second. It sounded like nothing. But a few thousandths of a second, Rennick said, was 30 billion times longer than the natural window. It was the difference between a door that flickered and a door that stood open. And through a door that stood open, even for a few thousandths of a second, a great many things could pass. "How long does it hold?" Kessa asked. 4 milliseconds, maybe 5 if the resonance is clean. Rennick's mouth tightened. "Then the loom breaker burns out. It is a one-use device. The stresses of holding a window and the weave open against the lattice's self-repair they are beyond anything we can build to survive twice. Zeus fires once. It holds the door for 4 milliseconds, and then it dies. And in 4 milliseconds, Kessa said slowly, what goes through the door? Rennick looked at her for a long moment. That, she said, is the part I need you to help me solve, because 4 milliseconds is enough for light. It is enough for a signal. It is enough to reach through and touch the universe on the far side and tell it that we are still here, still alive, still human, and that we did not accept the box they put us in. Her voice had dropped almost to a whisper. But it is not enough for a fleet. It is not enough to break out. And it is not enough, Kessa, to matter, unless we can decide in advance exactly what we send through that door and make it count more than any fleet ever could. Kessa was quiet for a long time. On the screens behind Rennick, the impossible windows opened and closed, 900 trillion times a second, each one a door to everything that had been taken away. When you say tell the universe we're still here, she said finally, you mean who's out there? Who would even hear it? And Rennick Salanwar smiled her loose thread smile, and Kessa understood that they had reached the real secret at last, the one beneath the secret ship in the secret slip. That, Rennick said, is what they don't want you to know. That's why the lattice exists, not because we're dangerous, because we're not alone. The Concord of 900, Rennick explained, was not the whole galaxy. It was a coalition, an old, vast, immensely powerful coalition, but a coalition, which meant it had members who agreed and members who did not, and it meant, crucially, that it had rivals. Before the wall closed, humanity had traded across 400 light-years, and in that trade, human ships had met more than the Concord's polite envoys. They had met others. Species and polities that existed outside the Concord's peace, that regarded the 900 not as guardians but as jailers, that had watched the slow, patient smothering of one young species after another, and had said nothing because there was nothing to be said to a power that could seal a star system inside a shell no fleet could crack. Chief among these was a loose confederation the traders had called the Outward Reaches, a scatter of independent worlds, refugee polities and species the Concord had judged and found wanting but had not yet gotten around to caging. The Reaches had no love for humanity. They had no love for anyone. But they had one thing in common with the human race, and it was the only thing that mattered. They hated the wall. They had lost worlds to it. They knew, better than humanity possibly could, what the inside of a sealing lattice looked like after a century, when the fire had finally gone out. They can't break a lattice either, Rennick said. No one can from the outside. It's designed to be sealed from within, so a rescue is even harder than an escape. The Concord made sure of that. A caged species stays caged, and the cage is built so that no outside hand can open it. But, she held up one finger. But the Concord's entire strategy rests on a single assumption, the assumption that a caged species cannot communicate. That once the wall is up, we are silent, we are alone, we are a candle under a glass, and no one outside will ever know whether we lived or died or how. That silence is the whole point. The silence is what lets them do this 1,000 times over without a single voice of protest reaching the others, because the others never hear the screaming. Every species they've ever caged has simply gone quiet, and the galaxy has assumed they accepted it, and grew peaceful and faded, because none of them ever found the gap in the weave. And Zeus finds it, Kessa said. Zeus finds it. Zeus holds the door open for 4 milliseconds, and in 4 milliseconds, Rennick's eyes were shining now, and Kessa realized with a small shock that the old scientist was close to weeping. In 4 milliseconds we send a signal, not a plea, not a distress call, proof. Proof of what the lattice is, how it's made, where its weave is thinnest, and the one thing the Concord has spent 2 centuries making certain no caged world could ever provide, the exact recorded rhythm of a sealing lattice's gaps, the music of the weave. We send the outward reaches the sheet music, Kessa. We tell them how to hear the door. Kessa's breath had gone shallow, and if the reaches can hear the door, then a lattice is no longer a cage. It becomes a wall with a keyhole in it, not just ours, every lattice everywhere, every world the Concord has ever sealed or ever will. We don't break our wall, we can't. But we can hand the whole galaxy the one thing that makes every wall breakable, and once that music is loose, the Concord's greatest weapon becomes the thing that damns them, because now everyone knows their prisons have doors and everyone knows how to knock. She let out a long breath. That is what Zeus is for, not to escape, to speak, to turn a scream into a key and throw the key over the wall. For a long moment neither of them said anything. Then Kessa asked the question that had been building in her since she first saw the slender dark ship in the slip. Why me? Really? You said pressure differentials, boundaries, but you have 1,000 engineers who understand boundaries. Why did you pull an integrity tech, third class, off the line and bring her down here? And Rennick's face changed. The fierce joy went out of it, and something harder and sadder came in. Because the Loomebreaker fires from the inside, she said. The resonance has to be tuned in real time at the boundary by a mind that can feel the weave. We tried automating it. We tried 900 simulations. A machine can predict the gap, but holding the door open against the lattice, fighting to close it, matching the counternote moment by moment as the wall tries to heal itself, that requires a pilot. It requires someone inside Zeus, riding the bolt, feeling the pressure at the boundary the way you feel a hull about to fail, adjusting the song faster than thought. She met Kessa's eyes and did not look away. It requires someone who has spent her whole life at the edge between what holds and what lets go, and it is a one-way trip, Kessa Vale. Zeus does not come back. Whoever flies it dies at the boundary in the light of the open door, 4 milliseconds after they reach it. The cold room was very quiet. On the screens, the windows in the weave opened and closed, endless, indifferent, each one a door that closed too fast for anyone to walk through. Kessa Vale, 23 years old, born in the tin corridors of the Luna Yards, who had wanted only one thing her whole life, to go out, to be one of the ones who left, looked at the dark spindle of Zeus waiting in the slip above them, and felt something turn over in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite hope. "You're not asking me to fly it," she said. "You're asking me if I will." "No," said Rennick Salanwar. "I'm not even asking yet. I'm asking you to help me build it. The flying comes later, and when it does, I will not ask you at all. I will put the choice in front of you, and I will let you make it, and I will not think less of you whichever way you choose. There are others training for the seat. You would be one of many." She paused. "But I wanted you to know from the first day exactly what you are building. I don't lie to my people, not about this, not about the box, and not about the price of the door." Kessa looked at the ship for a long time. "Show me the Loomebreaker," she said. "Show me how the door works." And that was how it began. The months that followed were the strangest of Kessa Vale's life, and later she would remember them not as work but as a kind of prayer, a slow, obsessive, collective act of will by a few thousand people who had decided, quietly and without ceremony, that they would not go gently into the box. Slip 14 became her whole world. She learned the ship the way she had once learned the corridors of the yards, by touch, by smell, by the particular note each system made when it was healthy and the wrongness in the note when it was not. She learned the Loomebreaker until she could have drawn its every coil in the dark. It was, she came to understand, less a weapon than an instrument, a resonance cavity wrapped in exotic matter, designed to sing a single perfect note into the gap in the weave, and to keep singing it, adjusting pitch and phase in real time as the lattice tried to close the wound. The device did not push, it harmonized. It found the frequency of the enemy's perfection, and answered it with a counter-frequency so exactly matched that the two locked together and held, the way two singers can hold a chord open between them longer than either could hold a note alone. And the singer in the end would be a human mind, riding inside the throat of the thing, feeling the boundary the way Kessa had spent her whole life feeling the boundary between air and void. There were 4 candidates for the seat. Kessa was one. The others were a decorated fighter pilot named Adami, whose reflexes were the fastest anyone in the program had recorded, a systems savant called Little Wu who could hold the entire resonance equation in her head, and a quiet older man, a former deep survey navigator named Costa, who understood the mathematics of prediction better than Rennick herself. They trained together, and Kessa liked all of them, and she understood without being told that 3 of them would live and 1 of them would not, and that no one yet knew which. The training was brutal in a way that had nothing to do with the body. It was the simulator. Rennick's team had built a rig that fed the recorded rhythm of the weave directly into a candidate's nervous system through the same neural link that would drive the loom breaker, and in the simulator, you did not fly a ship. You became the door. You felt the lattice as a vast pressure bearing down from every direction at once, a smothering perfection that wanted only to close, and you felt the gap open beneath you for its 100 attoseconds, and you had to reach into it with your own held breath and sing it open, and hold it, while the wall fought you with all the patient strength of something that had never in 2 centuries lost. Everyone failed at first. The window would open and they would flinch or lunge or misjudge the phase by a hair, and the wall would slam shut, and in the simulator that felt like drowning, like the whole ocean closing over your head at once. Adami's reflexes betrayed him. He was too fast, always overcorrecting, fighting the weave instead of matching it. Little Wu understood the math perfectly and could not feel it, could not make the leap from equation to intuition when the moment came. Costa was steady and patient, and simply not quick enough at the instant of contact, the door closing a half-thought before he could sing it open. Kessa was different, and she did not understand why until the night Rennick told her. "You don't fight it," the old scientist said. They were alone in the observation room above the simulator, and Kessa was still shaking off the neural bleed, the ghost pressure of the wall fading slowly from her skin. "The others treat the gap like a target, something to hit. You treat it like," Rennick searched for the word, "like a decompression, like a hull about to fail. You've spent your life keeping air where it wants to escape, and you know the secret that none of the others know. You can't fight vacuum. You can't win against it by force. You can only understand exactly where the boundary is and be there, present, holding, at the precise instant. You don't sing the door open, Kessa. You listen to where it wants to open, and you're already there when it does." It was true. Kessa had felt it without having words for it. The gap was not a target. It was a breath the wall took, an inhale in the endless rhythm, and if you stopped trying to force it and simply listened to the weave's own music, you could feel the breath coming, feel where the threads wanted to part, and you could be there in that space not as an attacker, but as a thing the wall had, for an instant, forgotten to exclude. She held the door open in the simulator for 4 milliseconds on her 19th attempt, and for 5 milliseconds on her 23rd, and after that she did not fail again. The others kept training, but everyone in the room had felt the shift, and no one said aloud what they all now knew. It was Costa who said it in the end, and he said it kindly. They were in the commissary, the 4 candidates, eating the thin rationed food that everyone in the system ate now, and Costa set down his fork and looked at Kessa across the table with his tired navigator's eyes. "It's you," he said, "you know that." The other 2 were quiet. Adami looked at his tray. Little Wu looked at Kessa with something that was mostly relief and a little grief. "It doesn't have to be," Kessa said. "The numbers could change. Any of us could." "The numbers won't change," Costa smiled gently. "I've run them more times than Rennick has. I've run them because I wanted it to be me at first. I'm old, I've had my flying, it seemed only right. But it can't be me. It can't be any of us. The seat needs someone who feels the boundary, and you're the only one who feels it, and pretending otherwise gets everyone killed for nothing." He shook his head. "I'm not going to insult you by acting like this is a happy thing. You're 23. You should have 60 years ahead of you, and instead you're going to ride a lightning bolt into a wall and die 4 milliseconds after you get there, and the rest of us are going to watch you do it and live and carry it." He paused. "So the least I can do is not make you pretend. It's you, Kessa, and I'm sorry and I'm grateful and I hate it all at once." Kessa did not answer for a long time. She thought about the tin corridors she'd grown up in. She thought about her mother, dead 2 years now of a lung thing that the closed system's failing medicine could no longer treat. She thought about her father, unmade by vacuum when she was 9, and about the meridian grace peeling into ribbons above the moon, and about 41 people who had been alive and then simply were not part of the universe anymore. She thought about the box, and the voice that had explained their extinction to them as if it were a kindness, and she thought, "They built a wall to make us silent. To make us go quiet like all the others, to make the galaxy believe we accepted it." "I always wanted to go out," she said finally. "My whole life, that's all I ever wanted, to be one of the ones who left." She looked up at the 3 of them. "Everyone laughed at me for it. There's nowhere to go," they said. "And now there really is nowhere to go, and I'm the only one who gets to leave." She found, to her own surprise, that she was smiling. "It's a joke, isn't it? The universe finally lets me out, just once, just for 4 milliseconds. "Kessa," little Wu started. "No," Kessa said, and her voice was steady. "It's all right, I mean it. I'd rather leave once and mean it than stay in the box forever." She picked up her fork again. "Tell Rennick I've decided. She doesn't have to do the speech she was planning, the one where she puts the choice in front of me and doesn't think less of me either way. I've made it. It's me. Let's build the door." And so it was settled, in a commissary, over rationed food, by a 23-year-old technician who had wanted only to leave, and had finally found the one way out that no wall could close. They built the door. Word of Zeus had by then begun to leak. Not the details, which stayed sealed behind the blast doors of Slip 14, but the feeling of it, the rumor of it, the sense that somewhere in the Luna yards, something was being made that had not given up. It moved through the closed system like a current. The rationing lines were quieter, less desperate. The suicides that had spiked in the first months began, inexplicably, to fall. People did not know what Zeus was. But they knew, the way people know weather coming, that it existed, and that it was theirs, and that somewhere behind the mothballed fleet and the failing crops and the painted-over sky, a few thousand of their own had refused to accept the arithmetic of the box. Idris Akafer's words were everywhere now. They forgot to ask us whether we agreed. Someone had set them to music. Children in the Belt colonies sang it. It became a thing people said to each other in place of goodbye, a small act of defiance, a way of saying we are still here even as the system slowly starved. The conquered noticed none of it. That was the thing Rennick counted on above all else. The wall was so total, the smothering so complete, that the conquered had stopped watching. They had sealed the box and moved on to the next fire. Their entire strategy rested on the assumption that a caged species could do nothing, and so they did not look. And so they did not see the slender dark ship taking shape in the deep slip, or the recorded music of their own perfect weave being refined, night after night, into a key. Kessa flew the simulator until the boundary was as familiar to her as her own breath. The team refined the loom breaker until its counternote was clean and pure. Costa and Little Wu built the signal, the payload, the thing that would go through the door in the 4 milliseconds it held open. It was not a message in words. Words could be faked, dismissed, ignored. It was data, the complete recorded rhythm of the sealing lattice, the exact mathematics of the gaps, the sheet music of the weave, compressed and repeated and hardened against noise, aimed not at any one listener but broadcast wide. A shout into the dark on every frequency at once, meant for whoever in the outward reaches still kept an ear turned toward the caged worlds. And they built the aim. That was Costa's final gift, and it was the hardest problem of all. Zeus could hold the door open for 4 milliseconds, but a door is only useful if it opens toward somewhere. The signal had to be pointed, not at empty space, but at the nearest listening post of the outward reaches, a relay the traders had once known as Threnody Station, 411 light-years distant, on the far side of the Concord's territory. Costa spent 2 months computing the vector, the exact direction Zeus would face at the instant the door opened, so that the 4-millisecond shout would leave the box aimed like a spear at the one ear in all the galaxy most likely to be listening. "It's a long throw," he told Kessa the night before the run. 400 years for the light to arrive. You won't live to know if it lands. None of us will. Threnody won't hear us until we're all dust." He looked at her. "Does that bother you? Throwing something you'll never see caught?" Kessa thought about it. "No," she said. "My father welded seams on ships he never flew. My mother analyzed stresses on hulls she never saw fail. Everyone in the yard spends their whole life building things they hand to someone downstream." She smiled. "I'm just handing mine a little further downstream than usual. 400 years. That's all. Somebody will catch it." Costa laughed quietly, and there were tears in it. "Somebody will catch it," he agreed. The next morning they woke Zeus. There was a night, 3 weeks into her training, when Kessa nearly walked away from all of it. It was not the fear of dying that almost broke her. She had made a kind of peace with that early, the way people in the vacuum trades made peace with it, because everyone she had ever known worked a hand's breadth from a death that did not care about them. It was something smaller and crueler than the dying. It was a message from Earth. The message came through the last of the internal relays, the one still working inside the box, and it was from a cousin she barely remembered, a woman named Talia who lived in one of the failing agricultural arcologies on the homeworld's southern continent, and whom Kessa had met exactly twice in her life. Talia did not know about Zeus. No one outside the slip knew. She had written only because the internal registries had flagged Kessa as reassigned to a priority program, and priority programs still got hardship allocations, and Talia's arcology was starving. The message was not a plea. That was what made it unbearable. It was worse than a plea. It was a careful, dignified, matter-of-fact letter from a woman describing, without self-pity, how her community was rationing calories, how the children had stopped growing, how the phosphate that had come from the belt for a century was gone and would not come again, and how they had voted as a community to reduce the ration for adults over 60 so that the young ones might have a chance. She wrote it the way Kessa's mother had once described hull stresses, clinically precisely, with the terrible calm of someone reporting a structure that is failing and cannot be saved. And at the end she wrote, "I don't ask for anything. I only wanted family to know how it was, in case there's no one left to tell it later. They forgot to ask us whether we agreed." Kessa read it 4 times, and then she went and stood in the cold observation room above the simulator, alone, and looked at the false color image of the lattice blinking its impossible windows, and for the first time since the wall closed, she came apart. Because Zeus would not feed Talia, that was the thing. That was the thing that nearly broke her. Whatever Zeus did, however far the key flew, it would not put 1 calorie in the mouth of one starving child in one failing arcology, not in Talia's lifetime, not in Kessa's, not in 400 years. The signal would land long after Talia was dust and her children were dust, and their children were dust. Kessa was going to give her whole life, the 60 years Costa said she should have had, to throw a stone into a well so deep that everyone she was trying to save would be gone before it landed. It was madness. It was the coldest kind of madness. It was choosing the far future over the present, the unborn over the living, and the living were starving now, and she could hear one of them in the careful, dignified sentences of a cousin she barely knew. She was still standing there when Rennick found her. The old scientist did not ask what was wrong. She read it in Kessa's face, and she came and stood beside her at the window, and for a while neither of them spoke. "I had a daughter," Rennick said finally. Kessa turned. She had not known. "She died in the first month, not from the wall, from the panic after it. There was rioting in the food centers when the rationing was announced, and she was a doctor, and she went in to help, and she didn't come out. Rennick's voice was flat and even, the voice of someone who has carried a thing so long it no longer bends her. So I understand what you're feeling, believe me. There is a part of me that wanted to take everything we knew about Zeus and spend it here now on the living, every gram of that exotic matter, every hour of that engineering poured into keeping people alive one more month, one more year. It would have felt righteous. It would have felt like love. She looked at Kessa. And it would have been surrender, slower surrender, kinder surrender, but surrender. Because a month more of a dying box is still a dying box. The Concord's arithmetic doesn't change because we're gentle to each other inside the cage. It only changes if the cage breaks. And the cage only breaks if someone, somewhere, is willing to spend themselves on a future they won't live to see. But Talia, Kessa's voice cracked. Talia's children will die inside the box, most likely. Yes. Rennick did not flinch from it. I won't lie to you, Kessa, not about this, not about anything. Zeus doesn't save the people we love. It's too late for them. It's too late for us. She turned Kessa gently by the shoulders to face her. But there's a word for choosing to spend your whole life on people you'll never meet, on a future you'll never see, on children not yet born whose only connection to you is that they'll be human and they'll be free. There's a word for handing something priceless downstream to strangers 4 centuries away and asking nothing back, not even the knowledge that it arrived. She held Kessa's eyes. The Concord thinks that word is foolishness. They built their whole cage on the assumption that a species, starved and sealed and told it's doomed, will only ever fight for its own survival, its own next meal, its own next year, and will never, ever spend its last strength on strangers who won't be born for 400 years. That's the assumption. That we're too small for that. That when you take away a species' future, it stops being able to act for the future at all. She stepped back. Prove them wrong, Rennick said. That's all Zeus is. That's the whole of it. It's 4,000 people proving that you can take away everything from the human race, our stars, our ships, our future, our hope of ever seeing it land, and we will still throw the key over the wall for strangers we'll never meet. That is the thing they cannot model, Kessa, because it is the one thing they've never possessed. Write it into the sky where they have to see it. Do it for Talia's children by refusing to accept the box that's killing them, even if the door opens too late for them to walk through. Someone's children walk through it. That has to be enough. It's the only thing that's ever been enough for anyone, ever. Kessa wiped her face. She looked at the lattice on the screen, blinking its cruel, impossible windows. It's a terrible thing to ask of a person, she said quietly. Yes, Rennick agreed. It is the most terrible thing there is, and it is the only thing worth asking. She paused. Go answer your cousin. Tell her the truth, that you can't help, that you're not allowed to say why, but that what you're doing is for her children's children, even if they never know your name. Tell her she was right. They forgot to ask us whether we agreed. And tell her that somewhere in these yards, some of us are answering the question they never asked. Kessa went and answered the message. She did not tell Talia about Zeus. She only wrote that she loved her and that she was sorry, and that she was working on something she believed in more than she had ever believed in anything, something for the far side of a long dark, and that she hoped, she truly hoped, that Talia's grandchildren or their grandchildren would live to see a sky with the stars turned back on. Talia never wrote back. Kessa never knew if the message arrived, or if the arcology held, or if the careful, dignified woman with the starving children survived the year. She never knew. That was the shape of everything now, acting into a dark that gave nothing back, spending yourself on outcomes you would never witness. She went back to the simulator the next morning, and she held the door open for 5 clean milliseconds, and she did not fail again, and she did not walk away. The last month before the run, the team worked in a kind of hush, the way people work when they are close to the end of a thing that has consumed them, and everyone came to understand without saying it, that they were building not just a ship but a story that would have to survive 400 years of silence, carried in the memory of a starving, sealed, dwindling people, if it was ever to mean anything at all. Because that was the second half of the problem, and Rennick had thought about it as carefully as she had thought about the weave. It was not enough to throw the key over the wall. Threnody Station would catch it in 4 centuries, or it would not, and either way no one in the box would live to know. But the box itself would go on, generation after generation, and if the people inside it forgot what Zeus had done, if they let the memory die, let it become a rumor and then a legend and then nothing, then even if the key landed, even if the wall someday cracked from the outside, there might be no one left awake inside to open the door. A rescue is only a rescue if the prisoner is still trying the handle. So they made 2 things in that last month, and Kessa helped make both. The first was the signal, the key itself, the music of the weave aimed at Threnody. That went outward into the dark, uncatchable and gone. The second was the memory, and that went inward into the box, into the people. It was Little Wu's idea and Costa's craft. A record, hardened and copied and seeded into every archive in the system that had any chance of surviving, telling the whole truth of Zeus in plain language. What the lattice was, where its weave was thinnest, what Kessa Vale had done and why, and when the signal would arrive, and what the people inside the box should do when, if the far side finally knocked. Stay awake, the record said in its last lines. Keep trying the handle. The key is out there flying, and it lands in 400 years, and someone will knock, and you must be here, still human, still awake, to open the door. Do not fade. Do not accept the box. They forgot to ask us whether we agreed, so keep answering generation after generation until someone comes. Kessa read that record on the last night, and she understood that this, too, was a kind of throwing the key over a wall. Only the wall was time instead of space, and the people on the far side of it were their own descendants, 4 centuries downstream, whom they would never meet either. And she thought of her father welding seams on ships he'd never fly, and her mother analyzing hulls she'd never see fail, and Talia's community voting to starve their old so the young might grow. And she understood at last that the whole human race had always been doing this, always been handing priceless things downstream to strangers and asking nothing back, and that the conquered had simply never looked closely enough to see it. They had measured humanity's fleets and its weapons and its rate of acceleration, and they had missed the one thing that could not be measured and could not be caged, a species that would spend its last strength lovingly on a future it would never live to see. They studied us for 2 centuries, she said to Costa on that last night, and they never saw this. No, Costa agreed. They saw the fire, they never saw why we burn. He smiled his tired smile. They will, though, someday, the whole galaxy will. And so in that last month they finished both keys, the one aimed outward through space at Threnody, and the one aimed inward through time at their own descendants, and they hardened them and copied them and made them ready. There remained only to throw them. There remained only the run. But before the run, before the door, there was one more thing the conquered had not counted on, and it very nearly undid everything. 10 days before the window, a conquered inspection cutter arrived at the lattice. It did not come inside, nothing came inside. That was the point of the wall, but it took up a station just outside the boundary, a sleek gray vessel that hung there in the painted-over sky where the surviving telescopes could just make it out, and it began to scan. The conquered, it seemed, did periodically check on its cages, the way a keeper walks the rows of a menagerie, not out of concern but out of thoroughness. And its scans reached through the lattice. The wall let the conquered's own instruments through, of course, a keyhole that worked only one way, and it began, slowly, methodically, to inventory the interior of the box. Rennick's people saw it, and for 2 days a quiet terror moved through Slip 14. If the cutter's scans found Zeus, found the exotic matter signature of the Loombreaker, found the slender dark ship woken and armed in the deep slip, then the conquered would know. Not that humanity had failed to break the wall, they expected that, but that humanity had found the gap, that the caged species had learned the music of the weave. And if the conquered learned that even one prisoner had found the loose thread, They would change the weave. They would rebuild every lattice in the galaxy to a new rhythm, close the loophole forever, and the sheet music Zeus was about to send would arrive at Threnody 4 centuries hence, describing a lock that no longer existed. The key would land, and it would fit nothing. "We move up the run," Adami said the first hour. "Fire now before it scans the slip." "We can't," Costa's voice was grim. "The window prediction is only valid for the computed date. If we fire early into an unpredicted gap, Kessa sings into empty weave and dies for nothing. The rhythm doesn't care about our schedule. The door opens when it opens." He looked at the tactical display, at the gray cutter hanging in the sky. "We have 10 days to the window. The cutter reaches slip 14 in its scan pattern in 6. We either hide Zeus for 4 days, or we lose everything." And this was where Kessa Vale, Atmosphere Integrity Technician 3rd Class, made her second contribution to the salvation of her species, and it had nothing to do with the seat, or the weave, or the door. It had to do with pressure differentials and boundaries between two states that were not supposed to touch, which was the only problem, Rennick had once told her, that mattered anymore. "The Loombreaker's signature," Kessa said, slowly, thinking aloud in the war room while the older engineers argued. "The exotic matter. That's what the cutter's looking for. That's the only thing in this whole system it wouldn't expect. Ordinary ships, ordinary mass, that's all over the yards, it'll scan right past it. But the exotic matter resonance of the Loombreaker is unique. There's nothing else like it in the box. That's the flag." "We know that," Adami said. "That's the problem. We can't shield it. There's no material that stops that signature. That's half of why the thing works." "No," Kessa agreed. "You can't shield it, but you don't need to shield it." She looked up, and there was something in her face that Rennick would later say she recognized, the look of a technician who has just found the seam. "You need to hide it in a bigger signal. You said there's nothing else like it in the box, so make something else like it. Not one Loombreaker signature. 1,000 of them. 10,000. Flood the whole system with the resonance, decoys, false signatures, cheap emitters that put out the same note, scattered across every slip and station and rock in the belt." She was standing now. "The cutter's looking for the one impossible thing, so give it 10,000 impossible things. Bury Zeus in noise. It can't investigate them all in 4 days, and even if it flags them, the Concord will conclude exactly what they already believe, that a caged species is thrashing, throwing everything it has at the wall, building 10,000 desperate gadgets that all fail. They expect us to fail. Let them see us failing everywhere at once, and they'll never look twice at the one place we're succeeding." There was a silence in the war room. "The emitters would have to match the Loombreaker's signature closely enough to fool a Concord scan," Costa said slowly, "but they wouldn't have to actually do anything. They just have to sing the note, cheaply, in enormous numbers. We have 4,000 people in every fabrication shop in the yards," Rennick said, and the loose thread smile was spreading across her face. "And we have a species that the Concord itself said accelerates faster than anything they've ever caged." She looked at Kessa, and there was pride in it, fierce and undisguised. "You've spent your whole life keeping one thing from crossing one boundary, and now you're going to hide the most important object in human history inside a flood of its own reflections." She turned to the room. "Do it. Every shop, every hand, around the clock. I want 10,000 false Zeuses singing in this system before that cutter reaches slip 14. Bury the truth in noise. Bury it so deep the Concord's own thoroughness becomes the thing that blinds them." They did it in 5 days. It was the most human thing Kessa ever saw. 4,000 people who knew they were doomed, who knew the box would kill them and everyone they loved, throwing themselves into the manufacture of 10,000 elaborate lies, laughing, exhausted, singing Idris Akafer's words while they worked, building decoys of the one weapon that might, 4 centuries too late to save any of them, break the wall. By the time the Concord cutter's scan pattern swept across slip 14, the whole Sol system was screaming with the resonance of the Loombreaker, 10,000 false notes ringing from every rock and hull and station, a caged species apparently thrashing in 1,000 futile directions at once, exactly what the Concord expected a dying box to do. The cutter scanned for 2 more days. It logged the resonance flood, and its instruments dutifully flagged 10,000 anomalies, and somewhere in a Concord data core, a report was filed noting that the human quarantine was exhibiting elevated but incoherent technological activity consistent with terminal phase desperation. A species flailing, the report concluded, in the predictable way that caged species flailed before they finally went quiet. The cutter's captain, whatever it was, did not investigate the 10,000 anomalies, because 10,000 desperate failures were exactly what the model predicted, and there is nothing so blinding as a prediction confirmed. Then the cutter turned and left, and went to inspect the next cage, and it never knew that it had hung for 8 days a few kilometers outside a 100-meter ship that was about to prove its entire civilization wrong. Rennick watched it go from the observation room. Kessa stood beside her. "You just saved everything," Rennick said quietly. "You know that. The seat, the weave, the door, none of it would have mattered. The cutter would have found Zeus, and the Concord would have changed the weave, and the whole galaxy's cages would have stayed locked forever. And you saved it with a pressure trick, with noise, with 10,000 reflections of one truth." She shook her head slowly. "An atmosphere integrity technician, 3rd class. They studied us for 200 years, Kessa, and they never understood that the most dangerous thing about humanity isn't our fleets. It's that any one of us on any given day might just look at an impossible problem sideways and see the seam." Kessa watched the gray cutter dwindle into the painted sky and vanish. "They forgot to ask us whether we agreed," she said softly. "Yes," said Rennick. "And now they never will. In 10 days you fly. Let's finish the door." There was no crowd to see her off. That was deliberate. A crowd could be noticed, and being noticed this close to the end could cost everything. So it was only the core team who gathered in slip 14 on the morning of the run, a few hundred of them, standing in the cold cavern in the dark, and it was only Rennick who walked Kessa to the ship. Kessa wore the flight suit that was really a life support cocoon, the neural link already threaded into the base of her skull, the whole apparatus that would let her mind become the singer at the boundary. She had said her goodbyes the night before, to Costa and little Wu and Adami, and there had been no speeches, only the 4 of them sitting together in silence for a long time, which had said more than any words. Now in the cavern there was only Rennick, small and gray and fierce, walking beside her toward the slender dark spindle that would carry her out of the box. "The window opens at 0614, Rennick said. "You'll have a 9-minute burn to reach the boundary at the predicted point. The prediction is good. Costa checked it 1,000 times, but the weave drifts and the last correction has to be yours. You'll feel where the gap wants to open. Trust that. Trust it over the instruments. The instruments will tell you the average. You'll feel the truth." "I know." "When the door opens, hold it. Don't reach for it. Let it come to you and be there when it does, the way you do in the sim. The loom breaker will fire automatically the instant you lock the resonance. Your only job is to hold the note. 4 milliseconds. That's all. 4 milliseconds of holding and the signal goes, and then," Rennick's voice caught, "and then it's done. You'll have done it. You'll have thrown the key over the wall." They reached the base of the ship. The hatch stood open, a small dark mouth in the dark hull, and Kessa stopped and looked at it, and then she looked at the woman beside her who had pulled her off the integrity line 4 months ago and given her the only way out of the box that anyone had ever found. "Rennick," she said, "when the signal lands 400 years from now, what happens?" Rennick was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "I won't be here to see it, and neither will you, and neither will anyone we love. That's the hardest part of this whole thing, not the dying, the not knowing. We're throwing a stone into a well so deep we'll never hear the splash." She looked up at the dark ship. "But I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that somewhere out past the wall, 400 years from now, Someone is going to be sitting at a listening post at Threnody Station, doing a job they think is boring, watching a sky they think is quiet. And a signal is going to arrive that no one expected, from a world everyone assumed had gone silent and accepted its cage 2 centuries before. And in that signal is going to be the one thing the Concord spent all of history making sure no caged world could ever send: the music of the weave, the proof that every wall has a door. Her voice had gone very soft. And that person is going to sit up, and they're going to call someone, and the galaxy is going to learn that the human race, sealed in a box and left to suffocate, did not go quiet. It reached through the one gap in a perfect wall, and it shouted so loud that 400 years and 400 light years couldn't stop it. And nothing after that is ever the same. Not for us. Not for anyone the Conquered ever caged. Not for the Conquered. Kessa nodded slowly. She found she was not afraid. She had thought she would be at the end, but she was not. She felt only a great steadiness, the steadiness she had always felt at a boundary in the moment before a weld held or failed. "That's a good thing to believe," she said. "It's not just belief." Rennick reached out and gripped her arm hard. "It's mathematics. Costa's aim is true. The signal is clean. The only variable left in the whole equation, Kessa, is you, whether you can hold the door for 4 milliseconds. And I have watched you hold it 1,000 times. You are the surest thing in this. You are the one part I don't have to hope about." Kessa smiled. "Then let's not keep the universe waiting," she said, and she climbed into the throat of Zeus, and the hatch closed behind her, and she was alone with the ship and the dark and the coming door. The burn was 9 minutes of falling upward. Kessa felt Zeus come alive around her, felt the neural link bloom until the ship's senses were her senses, until she could feel the vacuum streaming past the hull and the boundary ahead of her, not as a place on an instrument, but as a pressure, a vast smothering perfection bearing down from the whole enclosing sky. The lattice. She had felt its recorded ghost 1,000 times in the simulator, but this was the real thing, immense beyond the recordings, a wall of woven light 40 billion kilometers across bearing down on one small ship, and for the first time she understood in her body why the dreadnoughts had broken against it. It was not a thing you fought. It was the ocean. It was the sky itself. But she was not going to fight it. The burn ended. Zeus coasted the last stretch toward the predicted point, silent now, running dark, and Kessa let her mind sink into the weave the way she had trained, stopped straining toward it and simply listened. And she heard it. The music of the lattice, the endless rhythm of its self-repairing perfection, and beneath the music, the breath, the inhale and exhale of the weave as the gaps opened and closed 900 trillion times a second, too fast to count, but not, she found, too fast to feel. She could feel where the breath was coming. She could feel where the threads wanted to part. And she could feel that the prediction was slightly wrong. Costa's aim had been true to the limit of what could be computed, but the weave had drifted in the last minutes, the way Rennick had warned it would, and the gap was going to open not at the predicted point but 40 meters starboard and a fraction of a heartbeat late. On the instruments, it was invisible. The instruments still showed the predicted point, still counted down to a door that was going to open somewhere else. If Kessa trusted the instruments, she would sing into empty weave, and the wall would not part, and she would die for nothing, and the key would never leave the box. "Trust it over the instruments," Rennick had said. "You'll feel the truth." Kessa trusted the truth. She let Zeus drift starboard, a small correction, 40 meters, the last correction, the one that had to be hers, not toward where the door was predicted to open, but toward where she could feel it wanting to open, into the coming breath of the weave. The instruments screamed at her that she was off target. She ignored them. She listened to the wall's own music, and she felt the inhale coming, felt the threads gathering to part, and she gathered her held breath with them. And she was there, present, waiting, at the exact place the door wanted to open, at the exact instant it began to open. And the door opened. For 100 attoseconds, The wall was not there. For 100 attoseconds in a gap 40 meters wide, there was no sealing lattice, no smothering perfection, no cage. There was only open space, and past it, faint and impossibly distant and utterly real, the light of stars that no one in the Sol system had seen with an unfiltered eye in more than a year. The universe, the rest of it. Everything that had been taken away, blazing through a door the width of a single ship, for a span of time too small to have a name. And Kessa Vale was there when it opened. She did not reach for it. She did not lunge. She was already present, her held breath poised at the exact frequency of the weave, and as the threads parted she sang, not with her voice but with her whole mind through the neural link, the counternote pouring out of the loom breaker in a single perfect resonance that matched the wall's own music and answered it and locked into it. The gap began to close, as it always closed, as it had closed 900 trillion times a second for 2 centuries, the threads rushing back together to heal the wound. And Kessa held them apart. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, and it was, she realized in the doing of it, exactly the thing she had trained her whole life for without knowing it. The wall fought her. The lattice's self-repair was a living thing, patient and vast and certain, and it bore down on the gap with all the weight of the enclosing sky, trying to slam the door, trying to close the wound, and Kessa met it not with force. Force was nothing to the wall. Force had broken the dreadnoughts, but with matching. She felt where the threads wanted to close, and she sang exactly there, sang the counternote into the exact place the wall was healing, so that the 2 frequencies locked and held, and the door, which should have shut in 100 attoseconds, stayed open. 1 millisecond. She was pouring herself into the note now, her whole self, the loom breaker screaming around her as it channeled more energy than any human device had ever focused on a single point, the exotic matter of the resonance cavity beginning to burn. She felt Zeus dying around her. She did not care. She held the note. She held the door. 2 milliseconds. Through the open door, aimed like a spear by Costa's true arithmetic, the signal was leaving. She could feel it going. The music of the weave, the sheet music of every cage the Concord had ever built, hardened and compressed and shouted out on every frequency at once, 411 light-years toward Threnody Station, and the one ear in all the galaxy most likely to be listening. She felt it pass through the door and into open space, into the universe, into everything. A shout from a world that was supposed to be silent. A scream turned into a key and thrown over the wall. 3 milliseconds. The loom breaker was burning out. The counternote was fraying, the wall bearing down harder now, the threads clawing back toward each other, and Kessa gave the last of herself to hold them, saying past the point where the device could survive it, saying with her whole burning mind while Zeus came apart around her section by section, the way the meridian grace had come apart, the way the indomitable had come apart, but not against the wall this time, not broken by it, through it. With the door held open and the key already gone. 4 milliseconds. The signal was clear. The whole payload had passed the boundary. Every last bit of it was in open space now, racing away at the speed of light, uncatchable, unstoppable, 4 centuries from its landing but already irrevocably out of the box. Out, gone, free. And Kessa Vale, 23 years old, born in the tin corridors of the Luna Yards, who had wanted her whole life only to be one of the ones who left, let go of the note. The door closed. The wall healed as it always healed, the threads rushing back together over the wound as though it had never been. The sealing lattice restored to its seamless perfection, indifferent, unbroken. And in the place where a 100-meter ship had held the sky open for 4 milliseconds, there was only a brief scatter of light, a small unmaking, and then nothing at all, nothing but the painted-over sky and the stars fixed behind their glass, and a wall that looked once more exactly as strong as it had always been. But it was not. It would never be again, because the music was out, and a wall whose music is known is not a wall. It is a door that has not yet been opened. Kessa Vale was gone, but she had left. They did not know at first whether it had worked. That was the cruelty Rennick had warned her about back in the slip, the not knowing. The signal had left the box. The instruments confirmed that much, confirmed the 4-millisecond hole in the weave, the clean departure of the payload. But the signal would not arrive at Threnody Station for 411 years, and no one now alive would live to hear whether anyone caught it. They had thrown the stone into the well. They would never hear the splash. For a while that grief nearly swallowed the victory. But Rennick Salanwar had not built her whole life on things she would live to see, and she gathered the team in the cold cavern of Slip 14 after Zeus was gone, and she told them the truth she had told Kessa at the hatch. "We will not live to know," she said, "but we know this much. The signal is clean, and it is fast, and it is aimed true, and nothing in this universe is going to stop it now. It will cross 400 years and 400 light years, and it will arrive. And when it arrives, the galaxy is going to learn that a human being sealed inside a box, told she was too dangerous to be allowed to exist, reached through the one gap in a perfect wall and handed the whole universe the key to every cage the Concord ever built." She looked at them, her fierce iron eyes shining. "Kessa Vale is dead, but she is the first human being in a year to leave this system, and she left it at the speed of light, and she is still going, and she is not going to stop. 400 years from now she is going to arrive at Threnody Station, all of her, everything she was, in the shout she carried out. That is not a small thing. That is the largest thing any of us will ever do. We just have to be brave enough to do it for a future we won't see." And they were. They were, and so was humanity in the long, quiet years that followed. The box did not open. The wall did not fall. The crops kept thinning and the colonies kept struggling, and the Concord, noticing nothing, moved on to cage the next young fire somewhere out in the dark. To any watcher, the human race had gone silent at last, had accepted its arithmetic, had begun the slow fade the Concord had designed. That was what the wall was for. That was what it had always been for. But inside the box something had changed, and it never changed back. The people of Saul knew what Zeus had done. Not the details, those stayed sealed, but the shape of it, the fact of it, that one of their own had found the gap in a perfect wall and thrown a key over it, aimed at a future none of them would live to see. And a people who have done that do not fade. They wait. They kept Kessa Vale's name, and they kept Idris Akafar's words, and across 4 centuries of children in tin corridors and belt colonies in the thinning fields of Earth, they passed down a single certainty, quiet and unbreakable as a held note. The key is out there, flying, and someday it lands, and someday someone knocks on the far side of this wall, and we will be here, still human, still awake, to open the door. 411 years and 7 months after Zeus, at a listening post on Threnody Station that everyone agreed was the most boring assignment in the outward reaches, a young technician doing a job she thought was pointless watched a sky she thought was quiet, and a signal arrived that no one had expected, from a caged world that everyone had assumed had gone silent and accepted its box 2 centuries before. And in that signal was the one thing the Concord of 900 had spent all of history making certain no prisoner could ever send: the music of the weave, the proof that every wall had a door, the sheet music of every cage they had ever built. And the technician sat up, and she called someone. And within a year, the whole of the outward reaches had heard the human signal and learned to hear the door, and within a decade the first lattice fell, not humanity's, but that was coming, cracked open from the outside by hands that now knew exactly where a perfect wall was thinnest, exactly when its threads would part, exactly how to sing it open. The Concord's greatest weapon had become the thing that damned it, because a cage whose key is loose in the galaxy is not a cage at all. They had cut Earth off from the universe, and expected it to suffocate in silence like every world before it. But humanity's Zeus reached through the one gap in a perfect wall, and a 23-year-old technician who had only ever wanted to leave held the sky open for 4 milliseconds and threw the key over the wall. And that single audacious act, achieved by one small ship, where whole fleets had shattered, changed everything, for every caged world that ever was. And the girl born in the tin corridors became the first human being to reach the far side of the stars, still flying at the speed of light forever.